King's Landing has just fallen. The Blacks control the capital. We have Rhaenyra finally taking the Iron Throne, Daemon flying Caraxes right through the halls, and Ormond Hightower stepping up to surrender. He hands over the crown, and alongside it, he hands over a silver-haired boy that he claims is Daeron Targaryen. Daemon accepts the surrender. The war looks like it's over. But here is where the real game is being played. That boy, it's not Daeron. It's a merchant's son with the bleached hair, forced into the role of a royal hostage. The real Daeron, the one who earns the moniker Daeron the Daring in actual combat, is still out there, riding with the Hightower army. The Greens didn't just survive the fall of the city, they outplayed the Blacks. Now, if you have read Fire and Blood, you know this is a massive departure from the source material, but it's an elegant one. In the books, Daeron is named active figure throughout the dance from the day one. He has a station down in Old Town and marches with Ormond Hightower Ghost. Neither of them are actually in King's Landing when the city falls. Alicent and the small council handle this surrender because the show completely cut Daeron from the season 2. Most of us assumed they were going to awkwardly jam him into the plot at the last minute. Instead, the writers turn his absence into a tactical deception. None of the Blacks have actually met Daeron in years. There's no reason for them to suspect that the Greens would use a fee. The Hightowers just weaponize their own missing family member. But as the dust settles, the psychological weight of this victory hits Rhaenyra. When she walks into her father's old bedroom, the air is thick with the ghost. She refuses to sleep there. At one point, she catches a fleeting glimpse of Chase walking the corridors, and it absolutely shatters her. We have to remember, she has lost 2 sons in a battle of weeds. Viserys at Storm Sand, Jacaerys at the Battle of the Gullet. She has had zero time to process this grief. She was cast straight from devastating loss right into absolute power. The crown placed on her head before her son's blood has even dried. And this highlights a massive foundational flaw. Viserys was never built for war. He papered over every crack in his family and his wealth. The second he died, that entire structure collapsed. Now Rhaenyra is trying to be him, and that might be the most dangerous strategic mistake she makes all season. She wants a grand coronation. She wants the exact same theater and spectacle the Greens performed at the Dragon Pit for Aegon. She wants legitimacy, but there are 2 massive problems standing in her way. First, the faith. Rhaenyra wants Septon Eustace to publicly anoint her, but he refuses. He tells her the faith doesn't deal in dragons, a harsh reminder that the 7 were here long before Aegon the Conqueror arrived. This is a great nod to the book lore, where Rhaenyra is fundamentally at odds with the faith, because the actual High Septon is stationed in Old Town and loudly supporting Aegon II. And on top of that, Rhaenyra doesn't have the Conqueror's crown or his Valyrian steel sword, Blackfyre. As we know, Aegon II took crown with him when he fled, leaving Rhaenyra to wear her father's Viserys crown. But the second and arguably much bigger problem, the Iron Throne, is completely utterly broke. When Rhaenyra finally secures King's Landing, she discovers a crushing reality. The walls are completely empty. This is pulled straight from the pages of Fire and Blood, and it is flawlessly executed here. Before Rhaenyra took the city, Tywin Lannister brilliantly divided the crown's wealth into the 4 parts. He shipped 3/4 of it away to Old Town, to Casterly Rock, and to the Iron Bank of Bravos. Whatever was left, Aegon II burned through to fund his war effort. So when Rhaenyra takes the Iron Throne, she literally finds nothing. This forces Rhaenyra into an impossible choice. She desperately needs a lavish coronation to cement her legitimacy. But Mysaria drops a harsh truth bomb. Throwing a massive expensive feast while the small folk are starving would be an absolute political catastrophe. So Rhaenyra does something unexpected. She essentially becomes a socialist queen. She taxes the rich, decreeing that any lord who funded Aegon's war committed treason. If they want forgiveness, they have to pay a massive back taxes plus a penalty. She even opens up the Kingswood to the commoners for hunting, bearing only boar and elk. Now this is where we see a massive fascinating divergence from the books. The show is giving Rhaenyra a sympathetic, modern motivation for her taxes, punishing the rich to spare the poor. But in the lore, Rhaenyra's master of coin, Bartimaeus Celtigar, enacted brutal, ruinous taxes on everyone. He tripled port fees, doubled the taxes on meat and wine, and even charged the starving commoners a fee just to watch executions. It wasn't the wealth redistribution, it was exhaustion that bled the city dry and eventually earned her the nickname King Beggar with Tits. By changing this, the show is telling us a different story. Beneath the surface, Rhaenyra is trying to be just, but she is being crushed by the weight of leadership. Outside the city, Aemond has taken Harrenhal, burned the garrison and executed Simon Strong, prompting Rhaenyra to put a massive bounty on his head. But inside the Red Keep, her own council is picking her apart. She is juggling Aemond's movements, Daemon's relentless ambitions, and the bubbling resentment of the small folk all at once. Then we get this incredible confrontation between Rhaenyra and Alicent. Rhaenyra frames her restraint as mercy for the sake of her father who loved you once. She tells her. Alicent fires back, claiming she has no idea where the missing gold is, which is true, as Aemond completely froze her out of the council when he became Prince Regent. But then, Helaena speaks up and she cuts right to the bone. She asks Rhaenyra directly, "Did killing Otto make you feel better about losing Jace?" This is a phenomenal scene. First, it confirms Otto Hightower's fate, which lines up with the books, where Rhaenyra has him beheaded almost immediately upon taking the city. But it also shows us a much sharper, more perceptive Helaena than we got in Fire and Blood. In the lore, Helaena is entirely broken by grief and essentially facile. Here she is piercing. She even shoots Alicent a look when Rhaenyra mentions the original deed that Alicent was supposed to give up Aegon. Helaena is silently asking her mother, "Why were you willing to give up your own child when both of us have had ours taken from us?" It's an impossible position for both women. They are both mothers who have lost children to a war they couldn't stop. But then Alicent makes a brilliantly strategic plan, one entirely invented for the show. She points out that since Aegon is missing and horribly burned, no one actually knows what he looks like right now. If Larry Strong tries to raise him up as a figurehead, Rhaenyra can simply claim he is an imposter. It's an incredible piece of foreshadowing for the Daeron twist we just talked about, and it shows Alicent's political mind is still razor sharp. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra's quest for legitimacy hits a brick wall. She meets with Septon Eustace beneath the looming statue of Viserys, demanding to be anointed publicly, and he flat out refuses. "My gods do not deal in dragons," he tells her. This is very first time someone stands up to her directly to her face in King's Landing. It's a stark reminder that the faith of the Seven was ruling Westeros long before Aegon the Conqueror ever flew over the Blackwater. The Targaryens only converted to appease the masses, and the faith does not forget. In the books, the true High Septon in Old Town is actively rallying the realm against Rhaenyra. So the religious pushback here is perfectly on brand. Rhaenyra is sitting on the throne, but she is very far from actually ruling the realm. Then we get to one of the most heartbreaking scenes of the episode. Corlys Velaryon finally puts his cards on the table. He reveals to Rhaenyra that Adam and Aelin are his sons. Rhaenyra praises them, calling them stout of heart, and acknowledges she owes them a debt. So Corlys asks for obvious reward, legitimize them, give them the Velaryon name, and she refuses. She knights Adam, but as Adam of Hull, not Adam Velaryon, a Hull. It is a constant public reminder of his bastard birth, and Corlys absolutely erupts. He isn't just angry, he's completely broken. He drops that devastating line. History does not remember blood, it remembers names. He has given everything for this queen. His wife Rhaenys is dead, his castle is lost, his legendary fleet has been decimated, and now she won't give him the one single thing that matters to him. He pushes it so far that he actually calls Joffrey a bastard, right to her face, the exact same accusation that got his brother Waemon decapitated by Daemon in Season 1. From Rhaenyra's perspective, you can see the desperate logic. If she legitimizes two bastards, it reopens every single rumor about the parentage of her own sons, especially Joffrey, who is now her heir. But Corlys is right too. She is doing it out of shame and insecurity. Now, if you are a book reader, your jaw probably dropped during this scene. In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra actually agrees to this request. In the lore, she officially legitimizes both brothers, and Adam Velaryon becomes the undisputed heir to the Driftmark. By having Rhaenyra refuse, the writers are intentionally fracturing the foundation of her alliance with Corlys much earlier. It is perfectly setting up a massive book event. Later in the lore, when the dragon seeds betray Rhaenyra, she becomes deeply paranoid and orders Adam arrested. Corlys warns Adam, allowing him to escape on Sea Smoke. and for that, Rhaenyra throws her hand of the queen into the dungeons. We aren't seeing Rhaenyra lose her hand today, but the crab that destroyed them just calm. Speaking of decay, the rats are everywhere in this episode. They eat the candles, they scurry through the halls. They have been a symbol of the Red Keep's rot since season 1. Helena was terrified of them in season 2, a fear totally justified when a rat catcher murdered her son. Now they are completely out in the open. They are harbingers of what's coming. This leads to Rhaenyra holding the court, and it is a disaster. She is listening to petitions from the small folk, people complaining about hoarded food, empty granaries, and triarchy remnants sacking villages. But Rhaenyra is visibly struggling. The throne is physically uncomfortable for her. The edges of the camera frame literally blurred. Her period has started and she is fighting through the pain in front of the entire court. In Fire and Blood, it's written that when Rhaenyra sat the Iron Throne, the swords physically cut her. Blood dripped down her hands and legs, and the small folk took it as a divine proof that the throne was rejecting her rule. The show translates that literal, magical rejection into a deeply human physical toll. But the visual of Queen bleeding on Iron Throne is exactly the same. The setup of her downfall is all right here. Then comes the banquet, where Rhaenyra pulls an absolutely unhinged power move. She serves the lords the rat. It's dripping with symbolism. The commoners were forced to eat rats while the rich lords hoarded the food. So now she is forcing the rich to taste the reality they created, and then she robs them while they dine. But as she is doing this, the camera cuts to Torrent Manderly, watching from the corner, just smirking. He realizes what Rhaenyra doesn't. She just made permanent enemies of the people who actually hold power in the city. This is another wild departure from the text. In the books, Torrent Manderly and the Northmen were fiercely loyal to Rhaenyra and the Black faction. Here, the show seems to be repositioning him as a primary antagonist. I suspect they are setting Manderly up to be the architect of her public destruction, using propaganda and the fates to turn small folk against her. In the lore, this role is filled by a crazed one-handed street prophet known as the Shepherd, who incites the riot that storms the Dragon Pit. But the message is clear, the rats have come to the surface and they are hungry. Next, we get the knighting of the dragon seeds. Ulf styles himself as Ulf the White. Hugh takes the name Hugh the Hammer. And Adam, as we just saw, is knighted as Adam of Hull. You can see him barely hiding his disappointment. He knows exactly what that means and the ceiling it puts on his life. Daemon, meanwhile, is standing there looking completely bored through the whole ceremony. To him, knighting commoners who happens to have a drop of dragon blood is utterly beneath him. But here is what really gets me. After this ceremony, Ulf looks around and asks, is that it? He wanted a lordship. He wanted riches. He has been dreaming of this elevation since childhood. And now he realizes that even among Targaryens, some people are vastly more equal than others. These men feel used and honestly, they are right. Rhaenyra tells Hugh to send for his wife and promises them a house on Visenya's hill. If you know the lore, you know this scene is doing some heavy lifting to set up their future treason. In Fire and Blood, Hugh and Ulf's defining trait is their insatiable bottomless greed. They didn't just want a nice house in the city. They wanted castles. Eventually, their demands escalate to wanting Casterly Rock and High Garden. So giving them a modest house on Visenya's hill is a slap in the face that perfectly sees their impending betrayal. Later, alone with Daemon, Rhaenyra's cautious ambition is challenged by his boundless one. Daemon tells her he doesn't just want to rule Westeros, he wants to conquer Essos. He wants the free cities. He wants to build a Valyrian empire without end positioning himself as this world's Alexander the Great. Rhaenyra shoots this down, telling him there is such a thing as too much power. She reminds him that Valyria ended in the Doom, just as all unchecked empires do. She just wants to feed her people and hold the realm together. This is an interesting pivot from the books. In the text, Daemon's extreme ambition during this specific time wasn't aimed at Essos. Instead, he proposed something arguably more unhinged. He wanted to completely eradicate House Lannister and House Baratheon, wiping them off the map, and grant Casterly Rock and Storm's End to Ulf and Hugh to ensure their loyalty. Rhaenyra refused that too, proving she was still trying to play by traditional rules of Westerosi politics, while Daemon wanted to burn the board. But all of this gets overshadowed by the massive reveal at the end of the episode. Rhaenyra goes to look at the fake Daeron while he slips. He's just a boy carving wooden birds. She knows that executing him would cement her rule through the fear, but it would also make her exactly the kind of tyrant she's fighting against. So she decides to show a mercy. She will send him to Night's Watch. She goes to Allison to deliver the news, expecting some level of gratitude. Allison just looks at her coldly and asks, "Do you wish me to thank you?" Then the boy is brought into the room, and Allison drops the line that shatters the entire episode. "This is not my son." The penny drops. The Black have been played this entire time, while they have been dancing to Ormond Hightower's tune in King's Landing. The real Hightower army has been forced marching to Tumbleton. They haven't just arrived, they have taken the city and taken hostages. And Daeron's dragon, Tessarion, is inside the walls. If Rhaenyra sends her dragon to burn Tumbleton now, she will be burning her own innocent subjects. Ormond has brilliantly neutralized the Black's dragon advantage by using civilian population as human shield. This is a phenomenal tactical twist for the show, primarily because it completely rewrites the first Battle of Tumbleton from the books. In Fire and Blood, Ormond doesn't take the city peacefully and hold it a hostage. Tumbleton is a brutal, bloody siege where the Greens attack and the Blacks, led by their newly knighted dragon seeds, try to defend it. The tragedy of the book isn't the hostage situation, it's that the mid-battle, Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White turned their dragons on their own army, burning the Black forces and the entire town to ashes. By changing it to a hostage crisis, the show is forcing Rhaenyra into an impossible moral dilemma, right as her grip on the Iron Throne begins to slip. Alright, from here on out, we are entering massive spoiler territory. If you do not want to know what happens next in Fire and Blood and how this all ends, this is your cue to exit the video. Still here? Good. Let's talk about the betrayals at Tumbleton. We know that Ulf and Hugh are going to betray Rhaenyra in the books. This is known as the First Battle of Tumbleton, and they switch sides to the Greens purely out of insatiable, almost cartoonish greed. They literally just want bigger castles and more power, but the show seems to be setting up a much cleaner, more grounded motivation. If Rhaenyra orders a hostage-filled Tumbleton to be burned to the ground, Hugh is going to realize that she is willing to kill absolutely everyone, including innocent civilians and people close to him, just to secure her throne. It changes his betrayal from pure villainy into a desperate, morally grey act of survival. And when dragon seeds turn, Rhaenyra absolutely loses her mind. Her paranoia skyrockets, and she tries to imprison the remaining seeds, including Adam. Which brings us right back to Corlys Velaryon. This is the tragic payoff to that legitimization scene we talked about earlier. Corlys catches wind of the arrest warrant and warns Adam, allowing him to escape on his dragon. For this act of treason, Rhaenyra throws her Hand of the Queen into the Black cells and has him beaten. The man who sacrificed his wife, his speed, and his wealth for the Black faction is thrown in dungeon because he tried to save his own blood. It is a devastating downfall. Then there is Helaena. Earlier in the episode, she mentioned not wanting to stay in her room. In Fire and Blood, Helena's story ends when she takes her own life, throwing herself from her window in Maegor's Holdfast onto the spikes below. With the way the show has trained her dragon stream, it feels incredibly likely that she has already seen her own future. She knows exactly what is coming, and she knows she can't stop it. Meanwhile, the board is being set for the most epic dragon battle in Westerosi history, the battle above the God's Eye. Aemond and Daemon are going to meet at Harrenhal, and they are going to completely destroy each other. But before that happens, look at Ellie's River. She has Aemond at Harrenhal, and as book readers know, she becomes pregnant with his child. Rhaenyra has offered a massive rewards to whoever slays Aemond. Alice is in a uniquely powerful position here. She could theoretically orchestrate his downfall and claim Cursed Castle for herself and her unborn child, and honestly, this tracks beautifully with the book lore, where Alice actually stays at Harrenhal after the war and rules over it like a terrifying mystical witch queen. All the pieces are arranged for Rhaenyra's ultimate downfall. After the Ulf and Hugh betray her, her paranoia and desperation peak. She taxes the small folk into the absolute ground. The realm's delight official becomes King Maegor with the tits. The city will inevitably rise against her in a bloody riot, forcing her to flee King's Landing for her life. And while the book gives the credit for the public uprising to a crazed street prophet named the Shepherd, the show is heavily implying that Torrent Manderly, repositioned here as an antagonist, will be the political architect of her destruction. He's going to use the starvation, the taxes, and the faith to turn the people against their queen. The decay can no longer be hidden. The rats have come to the surface and they are hungry. But what do you think? Is the show setting up Torrent Manderley as the mastermind behind the Ranira's downfall? Or will we still see the rise of the shepherd? Let me know your theories down in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the House of the Dragon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.